You might not know it, but this one Greek story has influenced many, many movies that you probably like. Now, before I jump in, just a reminder, if you like the content, please share it, subscribe, etc. I'm trying to grow the channel and having fun doing so. Okay, so the story. What I'm going to tell you now is the story of Pygmalion. Some of this is going to be from Wikipedia. Pygmalion was a person from ancient Greece. He was a king and the sculptor of Cyprus. And when he was in Cyprus, he did not appreciate the way that the women of Cyprus were behaving. They were participating in the oldest profession known to man, things like that. It says, quote, he began detesting the faults beyond measure which nature has given to women, end quote. So at first he was determined to remain celibate, and to occupy himself, he picked up sculpting. And he made a sculpture of a woman that he found perfect. He even fell in love with it. He kisses and touches the sculpture, and he brings it various gifts and creates a bed for it even. Now, eventually it became time for Aphrodite's festival, and Pygmalion made offerings at the altar of Aphrodite, and he quietly wished for a bride who would be, quote unquote, the living likeness of my ivory girl. When he returned home, he kissed the ivory statue and found that its lips were warm, and then he kissed it again, and he found that the ivory had lost its hardness, and eventually it came to life. Aphrodite had granted Pygmalion's wish. Pygmalion married the now living sculpture, which changed into a woman, of course, under Aphrodite's blessing. And in Ovid's narrative, they had a daughter, Paphos, which the city Paphos is named after or derived from. So this story, Pygmalion's myth, actually has inspired a lot of different movies that you've seen. The first one, and what brought this to mind, was actually the 1980s movie Mannequin, which stars Andrew McCarthy, best known perhaps for Weekend at Bernie's, and Kim Cattrall, best known for Sex and the City. And this movie is about a young artist named Jonathan Switcher, played by Andrew McCarthy, who lands a job at a department store window dresser, and he makes a mannequin who becomes inhabited by the spirit of a woman from ancient Egypt and, comes to life, but only he can see when she's alive. So there's a little bit of the singing frog kind of spoof there. The movie's also famous. The song "Nothing's Gonna Stop Us Now" by Starship was an original song made for that movie that was a big hit at the time. Now, a variant of this theme can also be seen in the story of Pinocchio, right, in which there's, of course, a wooden puppet who's transformed into a real boy. In this case, the puppet is not a love object. It is a love, it's the love of a father and a son. Also, it's interesting to note that the puppet is sentient prior to its transformation, right? The puppet moves, but it's very much about Geppetto wanting to fall in love with a real boy. I will pause here and say, in children's stories, there's a ton of Pygmalion myths, right? From the Nutcracker to the Brave Little Toaster to maybe even we could say Winnie the Pooh or Toy Story. There's a lot of this idea of a child has a toy that, comes to life essentially. So maybe it's a stretch to call those all Pygmalion. If it isn't, then there's a whole tradition of it in children's literature that goes back, again, 1800s at least, with the Nutcracker, maybe earlier. Actually, I don't know if there's a long tradition of it that goes back to the Nutcracker, probably even earlier than that. Again, this idea of toys coming to life. In more modern stories, and again, more adult-like stories, you have George Bernard Shaw's 1913 play called Pygmalion, and that's a modern variant of the myth with a subtle hint of feminism. In it, you have Eliza Doolittle, who's a lower-class girl, and she is metaphorically brought to life by a phonetics professor, Henry Higgins, who teaches her to refine her accent and, become more worldly and conduct herself with upper-class manners in social situations, right? You probably know this play for the film adaptation or the musical. The musical is My Fair Lady, and the 1964 film adaptation, My Fair Lady, right? This is again, Eliza Doolittle, the rain in Spain stays mainly in the plain. Ooh, nailed it. So yeah, that is a kind of Pygmalion. Again, it's not transforming an inanimate object into a real woman. It's taking a woman who hasn't realized her full potential and is kind of stuck and giving her a new life. And if you do accept that as Pygmalion, then you have a lot of more movies and stories like this. The two that immediately come to mind is Pretty Woman, right? Where Julia Roberts is, again, the kind of woman that the original Pygmalion was rebelling against, right? The oldest profession in the world, but is transformed into a high-class, woman of reputation, right? And another version of that could be 2004's Million Dollar Baby with Clint Eastwood, where he turns a trailer park kid, Hilary Swank, into a prize fighter. Again, she has the potential; it's there inside of her, and Clint Eastwood essentially, metaphorically transformed her into who she really is. On a more literal version, there are still Pygmalion stories being told. In 2007, there was a movie called Lars and the Real Girl, I believe starring Ryan Gosling, who plays an autistic man who purchases a doll and treats her as a real person in order to reconnect with the rest of the world, right? And although in this version, this doll never comes to life, he believes she is real, and in doing so, he developed more connections to his own community. And eventually, he lets go of the doll, he buries it, and is ready to start real relationships with real women. So again, the Pygmalion myth lives on. I think there's something very innate about the Pygmalion myth in the sort of human psychology. Again, perhaps more so with children and the way we tell children's stories. If we were to try and list the number of stories about inanimate objects coming to life because of a child's love, that would probably be a long list. But again, I like to think also of the thread of Pretty Woman, My Fair Lady. That is also a whole other thread, which again, it's metaphorical, but also goes back to Pygmalion. And of course, Mannequin is that literal Pygmalion story. So I bet you didn't know it, but you have seen that story told and retold many different times. Thank you very much. I hope you found that kind of interesting. If you want to learn more, I'll put the link to the Wikipedia about Pygmalion story in the description. And don't forget to like and subscribe.